Welcome to the Zeta Report on Situational Preparedness here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We're live here on Mondays at 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and the first Monday of every month we have been doing and will continue to do a special episode of our show called the Zeta Report, where we bring in Nancy Leader from ZetaTalk.com as well as poleshift.ning.com to discuss various things going on with Earth changes, as well as what to look forward to and how to prepare for that. So I'd like to welcome back to the show Nancy from ZetaTalk.com. Welcome, Nancy.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is, once again, the Zeta Report with USAEBN. In partnership with USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will inject Zeta prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans in safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate, but we have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. Questions from the chat and issues raised in the chat will be addressed toward the end of the hour after the main feature has been presented. I'm going to do the 7 steps to determine the safety of your current location or your target location. There's been some relevant articles in the news which I want to just touch on, and they relate to Zeta Talk accuracy. As I said, prophecy is opinion. But some of the things that the Zetas have predicted were what we call plate movements. They call it the 7 of 10 plate movements, with the pole shift being a 10 of 10. And said that the edges of the plates had been worn smooth by the constant jerking back and forth, and that in the way that they would move. For one thing, South America, the top of it was going to move to the west like an ice cream cone falling over on its side and pushing the Caribbean plate down a little bit, and as the Mexico and Central America area pulls to the west with the Atlantic widening and the Pacific shortening, then North America would be pulled into a bow shape and deal with a lot of stress, and eventually this would result in the New Madrid adjustment being made. Well, and of course this was all their prophecy, but the plate movements have been playing out in that manner, and a couple of weeks ago on September 16th, when Chile had an 8.3, which I suspect was much higher magnitude than was reported, probably closer to a 10. And then certain things happened which pointed out the accuracy of the Zeta Talk prophecy on plate movements. There were tsunami warnings issued. It was an 8.3 along the coastline of Chile. But what was immediately noticed was not that the buoys out in the Pacific were going off where the tsunami was expected. They did within a few hours, within, I think, 12, 20 hours or whatever. But they went off immediately on either side of North America, out there in the Atlantic, North Atlantic, and to the west, and on either side of the Caribbean plate also, to the east point, this was nowhere near the Pacific where the water would be going juggling, and the outer western edge of the Caribbean plate was just covered with throbbing buoys. Well, a few hours later, yes, there went the tsunami buoys. As expected, Hawaii, the Pacific Rim over there, from the Aleutian Islands all the way down. And then a few hours later yet, the next day, the oddest thing, we had buoys going off on the Philippine plate, which is one that is affected by the 7 of 10 plate movements, and east of Fiji out there in the Pacific, and near Tasmania, which is the Indo-Australia plate, popping up and making adjustments. This is an example of Zeta talk accuracy, how things play out after the fact and prove their point. So now getting into today's subject. I am often asked by those new to the Zeta Talk material, particularly those who have been impressed by the Zeta Talk accuracy, whether their location will be safe during the forthcoming pole shift and earth changes. Particularly if somebody, they've just encountered, and they go to the Zeta Talk website, which has 45,000 pages in it, 10,000 of which are Zeta Talk, and even though there's a search engine, etc., and we've really tried to arrange it so that it's easy for you to find what you're looking for, people in panic don't have the patience. And I get emails saying, well, what about Podunk? What about Maple Street on Podunk? Is that going to be okay? I have small children. And this is serious panic, so what we've worked out.
What about the Corvette Museum?
Yes. 7 steps, and if you go through these, then you'll get your answer, and you can get your answer on if your location doesn't look too good, and you really think you should move to Uncle Bob's during the last weeks. Check out Uncle Bob's location going through these 7 steps. This is front and center on the pole shifting on their page up toward the top, 7 steps, and also on Zeta Talk, because they wrote the 7 steps. So I'm going to go through 7 or 6 different locations that kind of play out different scenarios. You're on the coast. You're in the Midlands. You're whatever, whatever you're going to have to deal with, tidal bore, never mind flooding, you've got to worry about high winds, that kind of thing, or also sociological effects. And while I do this, I'm going to be reading some Zeta Talk that they've written for each of these as an example of what you can find in the safe locations of information of Zeta Talk. So the 7 steps, briefly, are first to visit the safe location page on the Zeta Talk website and click on your country, your state, your province, and your city. This gives you existing Zeta Talk on your locale. And it may not be your city, but it may be the city 50 miles over, something like that, around your location, etc. Step 2 is to take note of your predicted new geography, your current location on the Zeta Talk new geography map. This tells you how your climate is likely to change. In other words, with a 90-degree crustal shift predicted in the opinion of the Zetas, then this means that the new equator is going to go down through the Bering Strait, down toward Antarctica, through Antarctica, up Atlantic, and cut through again through the Arctic to the Bering Straits. This moves the poles, the North Pole to off the bulge of Brazil, the South Pole to India, and so there, for almost everybody, gets some kind of a climate change. And you should, be aware if you're used to living in India and you're going to be the new South Pole, you probably don't have a furry coat, as for
right.
instance. Step 3 is to measure your sea level elevation. And the Zetas have predicted that due to the oceans heating from the friction of crustal slippage, the oceans of the world will rise 675 feet within 2 years after the pole shift. How will this affect your location? A lot of people are astonished. They say 675 because humans have predicted 200 feet. If Greenland melts and the poles melt, 200 feet. So where does 675 come from? Well, when you have a crustal slip, what you have is all this gooey magma under the plates, and there's friction, and the heat from that in the deep oceans gradually warms up the deep oceans, which are so cold. They're probably below freezing, but because the water moves. In any case, hot water takes up more space than cold, and they swell, and that's the sea level rise. And then after a while, I think 100 years or whatever, it will eventually go down. But meanwhile, a lot of parts of the world are in big trouble, from that sea level rise, and it'll sneak up on them. It'll just keep kind of rising up. It's not like it's a giant wave crashing down. It's the sneaky. Where's all this? Why is my yard so mushy? Kind of thing. Okay, step 4 is to determine if you are one of those regions that will rise or fall. India and Western Australia, the 2/3 of Western Australia, will be pushed under the waves because the Indo-Australia plate is being pushed under the Himalayas. That's why the Himalayas build. Japan gains 150 feet, New Zealand gains 500, and Eastern Australia also benefits from this New Zealand rise. Spain loses 50 feet, Western UK loses 150 feet, New England gains 450 feet due to the seaway rip, and Florida loses 150 feet just being pulled down because the Atlantic rips open. Vancouver Island gains 100. Step 5 is to research the effect of swollen rivers, which will likely be in a backwash during the pole shift, and ocean sloshing during the pole shift. Be at least 200 feet in elevation over a major river bottom. Be 100 feet from a coastline and 200 feet up during the pole shift to avoid ocean sloshing. Step 6 is to examine your volcanic or geographic risk due to mountain building. The Zeta suggests being 100 miles from any volcanoes that have been active within the last 10,000 years. Consider the new direction of the prevailing westerlies and stay out of the blowing volcanic ash, too. Step 7 is to ascertain if you need a migration route, meaning, oh dear, I'm going to be underwater, that kind of thing. Now, which direction do I go? Is this one has only to look at Europe and what's going on with the Syrian refugees to realize, what problems migration can bring. So heading in the wrong direction is a problem, and you can sort that out within Zeta Talk, and they address these issues. Okay, the 6 locations, I've selected one on each continent in different kind of worries, to show you how easy it is to go through these 7 steps. First, Nairobi, Kenya. In the Safe Locations page, the Zetas state that Kenya's greatest worry is marauding from Somalia warlords. Quoting Zeta Talk, which is an opinion, the Horn of Africa, Somalia, is warlord-prone, mercenaries on the rove. They are used to living on looting what they can commandeer with guns and by being ruthless brutes. Their reputation pressing all who hear them coming to lay out the goods before confrontations emerge. But in lean times, something else emerges, resistance. The marauders find little to feed themselves and fall to infighting among themselves. Thus weakened, they are picked at. Such a process may take years, even decades, but the outcome is certain. End of the quote. Now, in other words, all marauding gangs eventually end up out of bullets, or, as the Zetas like to say, they find themselves frozen in the night and, without the wherewithal to get through to the morning. They don't care for each other when they get injured. They are only looking to help themselves, and they have no sense of, save something for tomorrow, that type of thing. They don't plan well. They don't cooperate with each other, and they kill each other off when they have, fights. So eventually, that's what's going to happen. They'll be picked off, they'll run out of bullets or whatever, and that's the end of them. Okay, the Kenya Rift Valley. And it's quoting Zeta Talk, as the African Rift Valley spreads, Lake Victoria will grow in size. Those parts of Africa that are tearing apart will increase their spread. Since Africa is highland, this will not result in an invasion of seawater. End of the quote. What about the new geography? Kenya will be a temperate climate akin to today. And what about the melt of 675 feet afterwards? Sloshing water will not occur along the coastline, and no significant backwashing river issues as the rivers drain inland, increasing the inland lakes. So they don't really have to, if you take a look at the map of where 675 feet will go, which is part of the 7 steps, you see that Africa is almost like, wow, 99, it's almost entirely above the wave. It is highland across the continent, which makes it very attractive, except for Ebola, to people like from Europe, and it's if they were trying to break free from colonialism, here come the domineering countries again, because everybody wants to have a foothold in Africa. Okay, the Zeta's quoting, we have predicted the flood tide during the hour of the pole shift to be 500 foot with an additional 100 foot in height, where tidal bore is expected due to the shape of the land. One must be 100 miles inland and 200 feet up for a 500 to 600 foot high tide. Now, for Africa, that's not an issue, but these other locations we're going to get to, it is an issue. What about volcanoes? Well, there we are. The African Rift Valley does have volcanoes. The Zeta advice is to stay 100 miles away and not be downwind. Now, what does that mean? Because we're having a 90-degree crustal shift, the winds will change. The prevailing westerlies will continue due to the rotation of the Earth, but they're going to be coming from the south instead of the west. So therefore, they will blow up the Rift Valley toward the Red Sea and not, to the east. In that Africa is considered a target location, and it's underpopulated now. I don't know. It's certainly not like China and India, which have over 1 billion each, for instance. Now, North America, the USA has like 300 million. I'm just like nothing. So Africa is way down there. But they have Ebola, and they have what they need is wells to pump the water, so that some of these desert areas can bloom. Okay, the next one, Mumbai, India. In the Safe Locations page, the Zeta states that India will be devastated. It lies on a plate that will be driven under the Himalayas. And I quote, due to the compression of the Pacific during the forthcoming pole shift, India is forced under the Himalaya highlands with the violent thrust of the Indo-Australia plate under the Himalayas. Those in India will find, after the first strong jolts, that water is rapidly rising, coming in from the coast for those who live there, and coming from whatever area might be considered the lowlands for those inland. Giant waves will not occur, just a rapid rise in the water, which will force man and animal alike to tread water for as long as possible and then drown. End of the quote. Now remember, that's an opinion of the Zetas, that prediction. So if you look at the new geography map that the Zetas have provided, or the Zeta Talk website has provided, India will be the new South Pole to those clinging to the highlands in the Himalayas. And they will freeze. Even southern China and Iran will be almost polar. I mean, just turn the globe in your hands and pretend that that's a pole, and take a look at where Upper Canada is, and Siberia, etc., etc. And these areas are used to warm living, and suddenly they'll be like northern Canada. So what about the elevation? Well, this is a prime example of sinking and rising land, as it is sinking land. And the Zetas continue. Those in boats or clinging to floating objects will find the waters swirling, whirlpools developing suddenly, so boats will capsize and sink. The flood tide will close in on all sides of India and meet in the middle, creating crashing waves in the center and riptides as the water pulls back again. Drowning will be swift and is fortunately painless. Now, what they're describing is that people think of floods as, people can get out there and paddle around and everything. Oh, no. Get in a boat and you'll be fine, because of, the water can tear and scour and move very rapidly, and capsize, and whirlpools can develop, and it behaves in ways that are going to astonish people who have never seen this. So you can't assume that just getting a boat and you'll be fine is the answer. Eventually, after the pole shift, with the steady flooding of lands that are lowlands, less than 675, houseboat living should be wonderful. without worrying about whirlpools and everything. There are places on the globe where there are whirlpools, and the water gets pulled down because it's going to go out some exit of a lake or something like that, and these whirlpools are shockingly dramatic, during tides or whatever. So water hydrology is a very interesting study, and not to be taken, for granted. Okay,
Right.
migration.
Can I mention
in
something
India.
there, Nancy?
Sure.
That if we look at what happened in Japan with that major tsunami, that a lot of the boats ended up way
Yes.
pretty far inland, like miles and miles inland, as well as the whirlpools that some of the videos that I've seen of it, that it's not something you want to be a part of. After it settles down, houseboat, barge, whatever. I mean, but that the inflow and the outflow of the water is incredible power.
Yeah, and you get dragged back out. This is the issue. The water comes in, and then it turns around and goes back out and drags you out to sea. The Zetas have mentioned that. India is a migration example big time. And the Zetas quote, "Those who would survive the coming cataclysms are advised to leave the lowlands, which in the case of India as well as Western Australia means leaving the country. The best advice is to migrate now, of course, advice which many families living hand to mouth simply cannot take. But when it is clear that the last weeks are upon you, do not linger, as it is likely already too late. We have mentioned that immigration, legal or illegal, to Africa will be a strong press. Boats will be diverted to human cargo in great numbers." End of the Zeta quote. And they're making this prediction. I think that's a great idea. Don't go to Australia. They've already got the guns pointed at the boats. Don't try to clamber into China, which is like totally overloaded. They have over 1 million people, and they've got to move their people away from the cold zone up into those ghost cities in northern China that they've built, and the like. And Russia is just as determined not to be overrun. They have their own people to worry about. I mean, 75% of their land is going to be underwater, and they've got to migrate everybody to the Far East. So they don't go where you're not going to be welcome. Africa is underpopulated, and get those boats and go to Africa, and hardworking people from India will do fine. The next location, Hudson Bay, Canada. In the Safe Locations page, the Zetas state that much of Canada will be inundated in the aftertime, and that's around Hudson Bay coming in. It's not down along the Continental Divide like Alberta and where the mountains are following, but it's not near Quebec in these countries either, or the Great Lakes. It's up there in the northern parts. If you just take a look at the map of where the 675-foot will take you. So the Zetas say the worry Canadians should be concerned about is one that will sneak up on them in the days leading into the pole shift and in the 2 years following. Much of Canada has a low altitude, and where land lies lower than 650 to 700 feet, this will be inundated within 2 years due to the melting ice caps of the old poles and the swelling and heating of the deep ocean waters. Much of Canada is now lowland, as is much of Russia. End of the quote. Now, Russia just suffers terribly, and the Mississippi Valley and the Amazon Valley. And it's when you look at that map, it really socks you in the solar plexus as to where survivability is and where it is not. So looking at the new geography, Canada will be warmer, very temperate, with a new equator running through the Arctic. We're not permanently flooded. Survivor camps will do well. Eat the predator bears before they eat you. Something Zetas have talked about with Alaska. They said, in the north up there, it's going to be a situation with the melting permafrost and all, of bear eats man or man eats bear, and put your money, all bets are open. Well, a bear makes a good barbecue. Just to tell you, don't hesitate. And the Zetas say, Grasslands do well in the gloomy aftertime, weather that lasts for at least 2 decades, and with a milder climate, these cities may find becoming herdsmen will alleviate the hunger from lack of imported foodstuffs and poor grain crops. Native grasses should be encouraged. So Canada is underpopulated, and I don't think they're throwing their doors open. It's cold. They do have grain belt and the like, and they do have cattle. And even if all distribution of foodstuffs is cut off, it's going to be very temperate there. And I'm talking unlikely to. I mean, if Wisconsin is going to have Alabama weather with the new equator running from the Bering Straits to Antarctica, then these areas of Canada to the west, are going to be delightful living. Alaska is going to be absolutely tropical. What a shock to those people, right? And the Zetas continue.
Right.
This steady melt will affect wildlife as well, forcing predators to crowd along with man. And deprived of their normal food source, intense battles may occur where the issue of whether man will eat beast or vice versa will be determined. End of the quote from the Zetas. Obviously, they're suggesting that, have a bear barbecue. Canada flooding. The rising seas will sneak up on Canadians unaware of what is happening, who may head in the wrong direction. Many lakes in Canada will swell due to the post-pole shift rains. Houseboats are very much advised. So what we have here is a lot of lakes in northern Canada. They don't get all that much snow, and whatever rivers they have drain into some lake, and maybe eventually the lake has out into the ocean, but it'll get overwhelmed, because of not only the melting, but for 2 years after the pole shift, the Zetas have said it'll be almost continuous drizzle. We're not talking about a heavy monsoon. I'm talking endless drizzle, which does not, the grass grows, and you can, run your cattle there or herds, and everything would be fine. But you will get swelling lakes, and so people who currently live along the lakes, even if they're not going to go under, they're saying expect that the lakes will overflow their banks, and the Zetas quote, the most significant impact of the shift for this relatively unindustrialized and lightly settled province, they're talking about the Northwest Territories, will be the sudden change in climate, which will go from cold to hot almost overnight. What is now the eastern portion of the Northwest Territory will undergo steady inundation during the 2 years following the shift. Survivors may find themselves stranded and drowning. Thus, a survival technique is boats and heading toward the higher land in what is now the western or southern portion of Canada, end of quote. So, looking at the map, I can see where the rains are going to swell the lakes. And the Zetas quote, these rains will reduce to a drizzle, but floodwaters that back up from rivers bloated beyond their capacity can take a long time to drain. Those that would survive are advised to be ready to take to boats, not rooftops, or go to higher ground until some weeks after the shift. End of the quote. Okay, the next location, Guadalajara, Mexico. This is a very interesting one. I chose it because of tidal bore, which is something that does happen and can be astonishing when it happens. Okay, taking a look at a map of Mexico, in the Safe Locations page, the Zetas stress tidal bore up to 3,000 feet as Guadalajara's greatest worry during the pole shift. And you say, what? 3,000 feet? Oh, yes, because the land rises suddenly. It's along the Pacific, which is going to be crunched, and the water's got to go somewhere, and water under pressure, it's got something behind it. Can you imagine? It's like a sale at a store, and the door is open, and the people, the press behind you, say, "Get in that door, get in." So it's the press behind that is, it's not alleviating, and so consequently, the water is always saying, moving forward is a path of least resistance, and so moving up is the path of least resistance, and it just keeps moving up. And the Zetas say Guadalajara Situated near the west coast of Mexico, today enjoys the coastal access, but during the shift, this same proximity will spell doom to the residents. The Pacific will shorten, the Atlantic widen, and Central America crumble, creating a large causeway between the oceans, larger than Panama currently allows. Water will rush from the Pacific to the Atlantic, roaring along the Mexican coastline on its way to this outlet. Thus, more than a flood tide will present during the shift. Rampaging waters will sweep away anyone caught in its grip. End of the quote. And they mention more than just the rapid rise of land to where the water has no place to go but up. They're saying that because, and I think this is a known fact, the Atlantic and the Pacific are not on the same level. And what you're going to have is the Pacific water pouring through what used to be poor Panama, and scouring along the coastlines there of Mexico near Guadalajara. What about the new geography? Well, not bad once all this is passed. And the Zetas say, after the shift, the current coastline will go underwater in the main, but Guadalajara will have an easier coastal access, which will afford good ocean fishing. There will be plenty of rain for a few crops in the gloom, and a temperate climate equivalent to what it enjoys today. And what about worrying about elevation, 675 feet, etc.? Well, as you might imagine, they will be above that. They will be land. And the Zetas say Guadalajara is positioned such that tidal bore from the Pacific would reach this mountain city despite its elevation. Water will reach the streets of Guadalajara to the astonishment of its citizens. Rapidly moving water can be forced up into ravines and inland tidal bore to relieve the pressure, reaching even to the gateways of Guadalajara. End of the quote. Now here again we have a volcano worry because Mexico does have a volcano belt along the Pacific Rim. There are many volcanoes there due to the subduction of the Pacific. So move away from these volcanoes by 100 miles for the pole shift, and to avoid tidal bore, and you're out of the way, and then come back after the pole shift. Migration, you're going to encounter people from Central America or perhaps from the Caribbean, desperately trying to move north because already they will have flooding problems. Well, they're already migrating in this manner. Buenos Aires, Argentina. If you look at the Argentine map, in the Safe Locations page, the Zetas stress the danger from displaced water washing over the coastal mountains due to new land rising nearby. Now, what is this all about? Zeta Talk has stated that there will be new land rising from the waves, and this will occur between the tip of South America and the tip of South Africa. It's because the Antarctic plate will tip. It gets squeezed in the Pacific, which is shortening, and thus the Antarctic plate gets pushed down over there near the Pacific, and it bops up, in the Atlantic part because the Atlantic is pulling apart, and that's the void. And so, I can move over here because that's the void, and that's where they predict some new land will be. And of course, South Africa, those who take Zeta Talk seriously, has people that are prepared to, get in their boats or helicopters or whatever and go and lay claim to that new land. But what happens when you displace a large amount of water and this stuff is coming up from the bottom of this land? And what about all the water that was on top of it? Got to go somewhere. Well, it washes toward the coast of South America, and I'm sure it washes toward the coast of Africa also. And that's going to be a problem. You cannot assume you can go into the coastal mountains there along southern Brazil and Argentina because the water will rise up and rise over. So you have to go further inland and to avoid that. And I quote from the Zetas, those who would survive in Argentina along the coastline towards the tip of South America in particular should assume the mountains along the coast a danger zone and move inland to the highest mountain peaks that they can reach in order to survive this time. Looking at a new geography map, what's their climate going to be? Well, they'll have a similar climate to today, and I quote, Buenos Aires is blessed today with an ideal location along with a rich coastline at the mouth of a river, surrounded by rich farmland and with a backdrop of mountains only a day's drive away. Much of this will remain the same after the shift, with the climate remaining the same too. Main thing, get away, come back later, which they state a lot, for people that if you like your home, come back afterwards and see what remains. What about the 675 melt? And I quote from the Zetas, Buenos Aires will likewise suffer when the existing poles melt within 2 years after the shift, rising the sea level some 650 to 700 feet. This will inundate many areas around Buenos Aires as well as many residences, forcing survivors to crowd into already crowded and starving situations. Tempers will flare, resulting in ugly confrontations, with few surviving. End of the quote. Now, this is an example of what they say about cities surrounded by water. Dallas, Texas has a similar warning. They actually predict cannibalism because there's so many corporate executives that go there and have headquarters, and they're these kind of people.
Talk about Shark Tank.
Yeah. I'll eat the secretary. Don't be in a city. Especially don't be in a city where you're going to be trapped, and you can't get away because what are you going to do for food? Okay, the new land rising, and I've described that. This is because, and by the way, there's a magnetic anomaly right where the Zetas say there'll be new land rising. In other words, where that's ripping apart and the plate is rising up. There's it's called the South Atlantic anomaly, and it's magnetic anomaly, and it matches what the Zetas have said about new land there, the Zeta prediction, which is only an opinion. And I quote from the Zetas, is there some relationship between the anomaly and the emerging new land that will appear nearby when the Antarctic plate pushes up between the tip of South America and South Africa during the pole shift? This spot has been pulling apart, creating a void between the Great South America and Great African plates over the decades, as Pangea has pulled apart. End of the quote. Now, Argentina elevation, they don't do too badly because they do have the mountains to the west. And I quote, during the shift itself, we predict that new land, in fact a new continent, will rise between the lower part of South America and Africa, just north of Antarctica. This will displace a large amount of water that will rush up the shorelines in a direct path from this new continent's rise. Those along the coast in ravines where tidal bore will occur will find this flood tide immense as it will wash into the foothills of the mountains, crashing and surging. Those who would survive should retreat into the mountains, well into them, until the ocean tides are regular and not erratic, a period of several days after the shift. End of the quote. Moscow, Russia. In the Safe Locations page, the Zeta state that most of Russia, as with a good portion of Canada, will be inundated within 2 years after the pole shift. And a quote from the Zetas, vast, heavily populated areas of Russia will become steadily flooded after the pole shift, to the dismay of survivors who perhaps have assumed they survived the worst. End of the quote. New geography, they do well. The new equator through the Arctic bodes well for Russia in the aftertime. And I quote from the Zetas, Russia, which in the main is frozen northlands, will be pleasantly surprised to find itself in a warmer climate, end quote. And what about the 675? This is where they really get hit. When you look at the map, you can see, east of the Urals, Moscow, the Kremlin, all this underwater. And all the way down, east of Ukraine, east of Romania, and all these countries, just underwater. All the way to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and then you go all the way over to the Far East. Although Kazakhstan, the Stans do okay, they're highland, but over there in the Far East, great. In the first place, they're going to have a really wonderful climate because the new equator goes through the Bering Straits. It's not well, I'm jumping ahead, and I've got something interesting to tell you about how the Russian government is taking Zeta talk seriously and how we know. Okay.
Mhm.
Here's a quote from the Zetas. Siberia is lowland, and the melting poles will swallow this land within months. Russia, in the main, is a lowland which will shortly be flooded after the shift. The Ural Mountains are the sanctuary to which the elite of Russia will rush. These beautiful mountains will become an island surrounded by the rising waters, which will engulf the lowlands of Russia within 2 years after the shift. We would advise that those who are not near mountains or highlands, such as the Urals, to fashion boats early and plot a course, citing familiar landmarks as they move on houseboat or whatever they have devised prior to a full flooding of their lowlands. The water can be expected to rise for 2 years after the shift, but during this time, a floating group can fish or harvest from the sea. End of the quote. And you don't want to be where you was water in all directions and your compasses, you can't figure out what happened here, with the
Right.
compass. And you want to be able to cite your landmarks and plot a course so that you are not surrounded by water and you're just along a coastline. In the end of all of this, you're in a houseboat, but you're along a coastline and you kind of know where you are, in case you spring a leak, I suppose. All right. What about Moscow, the poor city that is their capital at present, and it's going to be and it's going to have water problems even before the 675 melt because it's a highland of a bunch of rivers, and a bunch of rivers coalesce there and pass by. And I got to tell you, it's not tranquil. When you have a lot of drizzle and all the rivers are flooding and engorged, or you have a backwash kind of a problem. Once again, it's not tranquil. And here's a quote from the Zetas. At the headlands of rivers, Moscow will find its water rising to its doors. At first, this news will come to them by the desperate homeless, arriving at the headlands with reports that the waters are rising in the rivers, coming inland from all directions. Ultimately, the waters will swallow Moscow, drowning any who have remained there. Now, here's what I wanted to tell you about how if China is building their ghost cities far away from India in their northern areas and inland, near Inner Mongolia, etc., where they intend to move their populace, or at least their governing elite. But what about Russia? Well, I think it's at least 3 years ago. Well, wait, February 2014, Medvedev, I know I mispronounced his name, he moved his state offices to the Far East. This was in the papers. We're moving to the Far East he gave no reason for it. Industry and farming were encouraged to go there. In September 2015, free land for Russians were moving there, 12 acres each. This was in the papers. Now, within this last year and a half or so, there's a new naval base just above the Far East. It's called the New Siberian Islands. And there it is. They're building a second naval base. They had one in the Crimea, etc. But I mean, that's where Russia's going to be, and they're in lock, stock, and barrel. And I've seen other articles saying, well, the Kamchatka Peninsula, growing cabbages and this. Well, right now it's nothing but a bunch of grizzly bears. It's horrible, and I mean they're fierce, but come on, farmers. We want industry, and he's trying to get the billionaires in Russia or anybody to invest money and get industry going there in Kamchatka and the Far East, and they're serious about this. And why would they be doing this? Well, I just have to say, somebody's been reading Zeta Talk and takes it seriously, and the Russians are not dummies. And my final quote from Zeta Talk: northern and western Russia is a huge area, well populated today, and almost all of these people will be migrating in the aftertime. I think they have 250 million. Their population is equivalent to the U.S., I think, in size. he doesn't intend to let any of them drown, and I think Obama has his plans too, which are very hidden. They're hidden in executive orders, and they will only the genius of his plotting and planning, in spite of the Republican Congress that fights him tooth and nail on every step, will only be seen when things play out. But in Russia and China, you can see them. They're more dictatorial, these countries, Russia and China, so that they could come out and say, we're going to do this, and they don't have to explain to anybody. Well, they have the Duma, I guess, etc., and the People's Congress, but they have a lot more control over what they want to do. This is the end of my lecture, and we are 15 minutes to go yet, and I promised that Andre or anybody in the chat who has questions or something to say, have at it.
Okay. Well, right now I have several people in the chat room online right now, but no questions as of yet. One quick follow-up to not necessarily just the Russian and China, with the ghost cities and Russia moving its assets east for the pole shift and encouraging their populations to start to do so. I've also seen that Egypt is considering moving Cairo away as their nation center, more inland as well.
Oh, really?
More than likely due to, well, I'm not sure if that's, the press out of that country is not that great at times. But do you think that, your opinion personally, that the world is, not necessarily the media, but the rest of the world is ready for this information out there, that this is the time to make a change in your lifestyle to protect yourself and your family?
No, they're expecting everybody to run screaming in the streets. I mean, they're expecting the worst. The Zetas have said, it's going to be people are going to be a lot calmer than the establishment thinks. They're going to be a little shocked. People can't react. They live. What is it like? Almost everybody lives from paycheck to paycheck. They can't get along for more than 6 weeks. They don't have the means to run screaming in the streets. The only people, it's the billionaires and millionaires that can do that. I think they've been trying to prepare people. There's been increasing reporting about the end times and the skies look funny, maybe these are the end times. And it's not just Cairo that may be moving further inland, but Jakarta's mayor was saying, well, we're going to go to Borneo, which happens to be Indonesia also. We're going to move the whole city to Borneo inland there. And I mean, they lost like 80 foot of elevation, which, by the way, was a Zeta prediction. And they attribute it, and they keep building up their seawalls and adding more pumps and bringing the Netherlands experts down and say, what kind of dikes should we build, and that kind of thing. But you get these pictures, and the town square is like awash with 3 or 4 feet of water, and this was, they're under, and it's seawater. In other parts,
right.
Seawater coming in. So it's not from rain if it's seawater. So I won't go through all the ins and outs, but it's total denial. They keep saying, no, just heavy rain. So now they're saying, we've got to move our headquarters to Borneo. Well, that's another example, without adequate explanation. They have, the underneath Jakarta, we've been pumping water out so that everybody can take a lot of baths, and that's caused the land to drop. I mean, they have their excuses. So no, I don't think anyone's ready. It will be actually, the Zetas have predicted that those people that are more comfortable with denying their denial is going to harden. And those people that are really have been uneasy and sensing something was wrong, they're going to say, I thought something was up. And they're going to make plans like we've discussed right now. It's really going to be an exciting time. If you're not head in the sand, you don't have to punch a time clock and work for a boss you hate. The school will be out for the kids. They'll be able to do active things like help Dad build a houseboat, and you're going to be healthier, you're going to eat better, you're going to lose that blubber, you get rid of diabetes and heart disease, and there's and besides which, it's not just going to be human to human. You're going to start meeting friendly aliens and become a galactic citizen. This is a transformative period for the Earth. So it's like the great unknowns, So, it's not all bad, but there's going to be a split, and they are anticipating that everybody's going to panic. Every country is sort of braced to institute martial law in some regard. And in the U.S., we're all braced for that too.
Well, it's been happening all summer here, right? I mean, we've been feeling it all summer. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jade, even though Jade Helm was only the southern states, and people in like Montana were saying, "What's that?" The Humvees and the what, So, yeah. They but I don't think it's going to be that kind of panic. As a matter of fact, the Zetas have said you have to worry more about the people in charge going kind of nutsy rather than the man on the street. You can't assume they're not necessarily going to be the ones who are calm, like they do in the movies. Everybody's calm, and the Department of Defense is calm, and they're likely to be running down the corridors screaming and losing it, and the poor plumbers and electricians and housewives out there are going to be say, well, okay, we got to take care of ourselves now. What are we going to do? So plan on self-sufficiency, and by that I mean you take care of yourselves and your neighbors and your friends and your families and stuff like that. Yeah. So no, I don't think they're ready.
Well, I don't think they are too, but that's why we're doing what we're doing here at USA EBN,
right.
Partnering with ZetaTalk.com as well as you and poleshift.ning.com to kind of get this information out so you can do the planning. Not so much planning, let's get some action in there because, we're running out of time here. You can see the sea level rises and all of the things going on with earth changes all around the world. Some examples we cited here of what's to be upcoming from the Zeta Talk predictions. This is the time to, what we stress here on this network is you are your own first responder. If you're depending on somebody else, the government, local authorities, your local government to help you out and get you through something like a pole shift, yeah, they'll probably be there eventually, but initially it's going to be you, and it might as well be you and your family and the community that you build to get through it. And that's part of it too, is like building that relationship with your neighbors and building a community and getting back to basics about, getting through a tough event, but afterwards, it's the rebuilding. That's what we're really talking about.
Yeah, last month we did something which I, like a machine gun, went through every survival tip that I could, think of, that good information about how you get along without, there's no electricity, there's no food distribution, and don't panic, because everything that you anticipate you have to get from modern civilization, you can do for yourself. Eat bugs and worms, and have chickens that eat bugs and worms, and all kinds of herbal meds, and I mean on and on. Build a shelter from junk. Think what fun that's going to be. A tornado goes through town and everything's strewn all over the place. But some of these little houses that have been built from junk, are just charming. And what a fun project. You can use tires off of cars, which now you can't drive because the car was tossed on its top, and the roads are all torn up. So take those tires out, fill them with dirt, and stack them in a circle. And here you have a lovely igloo kind of thing, very sturdy. It's not going to move if there's an earthquake or high winds, and there's all kinds of ideas, within the pole shifting, within Zeta Talk, and other people elsewhere. Have you noticed how so many newspapers and magazines, they're putting out an article about, this charming little tiny house, or look at this little houseboat built from junk,
right.
And this is they're emphasizing it. it's about as big as a U-Haul thing that you'd pull behind your car, but you can go in there and sleep and take a shower and etc. And so they're trying to implant an idea in your head, and it's always something that the homeowner himself has built. It's not like I contracted with somebody or I went and bought it. Yeah, you do it yourself, and frequently they say, oh, went down to the junkyard and bought. If somebody demolishes a house, they take out the plumbing and the windows and things like that, and then they trash the rest. So these windows, storm windows or whatever, they're for sale and darn cheap too. And so they go to these places and they buy things like that, and they describe, I got the doors and windows from for 30 cents each, and like that. And it's just a fun project.
Yeah. Well, when you look at it that way, it really puts when you put that positive spin on it, it helps with actually dealing with it and getting it done. When you say, "Oh, the world's going to end," what am I, pole shift? What do I do? Well, we're all going to die. If that's your attitude, and that's probably going to be the result. Whereas, if you look at it more on the positive side, it's like, what can we do to get ready? Let's do so. Let's find a safe location, get to it. Let's have some supplies ready. Let's build a community. That's what we're talking about, and that's why, USA, EBN, and Zeta Talk are pushing this forward with these shows. And also, Nancy, I was wondering if we've got a couple of minutes left in the show. I do have a caller online. Do you want to take a phone call?
Sure.
Or
Sure.
We'll try it.
Sure.
See what happens.
Try.
Thanks for calling USA EBN. You're on Zeta Report with Nancy and Andre. How can we help you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Nancy. This is Chris. I'm from Minnesota, and I had a quick question. I know it sounds kind of redundant about asking about this, but can we expect the announcement anytime soon? I know it sounds like, it's one of those questions you shouldn't be answering, but I know you've got a lot of listeners that, we all kind of depend on this announcement to help sway our families, to help them believe us that we're not all crazy.
Yes. Yeah. The answer is yes. And the Zetas first predicted that Obama would make that announcement in June of 2012, and they said he wanted to do that, and he was setting forth. And then he was attempting, and he was being blocked. If he tried to do an emergency broadcast, they cut wires, or they just prevent. And the whole story about if it would be so partial and limited, and then they would say, the poor man lost his mind, that type of thing. It was hauled away in a white jacket. And then he tried an Oval Office thing, and there's that 30-second delay, and the media was just owned by the elite, and they weren't going to have it, and they get these fake court orders saying it's a hoax. And so anyway, then he got in cahoots with Putin and the China guy, Xi, chairman, and they were going to have a united front. I really thought it might happen, in September, the end of September. Well, I think that was a fake lead to see what they could muster forth. And September 23rd to 28th, we had every ridiculous story. We were going to have a rapture. There was going to be a meteor that was going to strike in the Atlantic.
Everything.
And I don't know what all, but there was at least half a dozen wacky theories about something going to happen. Oh, the Pope had given a fire and brimstone lecture or preaching, and he hadn't. It was just total fake and running around the Internet. So that shows you the kind of noise that can be generated. The Zetas have said it is absolutely going to happen. It's going to be atypical, something in a manner you don't expect, and that means it's not going to be Obama in the Oval Office or, taking over the emergency broadcast. It's going to be something I'm not sure what, and I'm not allowed to know.
Yeah.
I would be in situations like this, and I would leak the information. It is going to happen, and when it does, we're not going to have martial law and panic in the streets, although we may have martial law from panicked governments, temporarily. But it is, and I can't give you an exact date, but it's darn close.
That's cool.
Chris, let me tell you
it's exciting. It's very exciting to wait for this to come to fruition.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's going to mean it's going to be a big change. We'll still have all kinds of challenge. The challenge will just shift, and it'll be okay. Now Nancy was right about Nibiru, and we are going to have a pole shift, but it's not going to be as bad as she says. It's going to shift. You know, the line will move. One reason that it could be that Biden is hesitating is that if it happens that way and there's enough unrest, Obama may delay the 2016 elections at least for 3 months or something like that until people can get their head back on straight and get back to paying attention. But whether or not they would ever be restarted or people ever calm down is questionable too. But you know, one reason for Biden he's stalling, is that he expects this announcement to happen any minute, and he doesn't want to jump into the race if it's going to happen. But so I've been watching Biden as much as anything. Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Chris. We're really short on time. I'm sorry, Chris, but thanks for your question. I do appreciate you calling into the show. Like I said, we're really tight on time, and hopefully that answered your question. But it did. Nancy and I were talking last couple of weeks before the big thing with September and all the sky is falling talk on the internet. We kind of thought that, you know, with everything happening in New York and D.C., that we might get an announcement, but it didn't seem to pan out. But we'll still do what we're doing here and teaching people what they need to know about pole shift and how to get through it, and hopefully the rest of the media will catch up with us. Yeah.
You got to tell people what to do before you tell them the bad news. You have to tell them what they can do about it before you tell them the news, and that's what we've been trying to do. Yeah.
Thanks again, Nancy, for your time. Great information about safe locations and the 7 steps. We'll link up your YouTube when we get that up as well to the Facebook. Okay. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you too, Andre. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.